Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight. I'm your host, David Collis. I want to shout out to my audience. Thank you for listening. You're the lifeblood of my show. Please click the follow, subscribe, or like buttons on our Nightlight Blog Talk radio page, our Nightlight YouTube channel, and my Nightlight with David Collis Facebook page. That helps me know you are listening. Plus, you'll get all of our updates. My guest tonight is Eric Munoz. He is a consultant and an agent of cultural change and was the staff planner for the city of Carlsbad in California. He is the vice president of the California Surf Museum, a board member of the Agua Hedionda Lagoon Foundation, and partner of the Palm Springs Surf Club. He also authored the children's book called Peli Can Surf and wrote an in-depth analysis about a serious environmental challenge he faced titled Caulerpa Conquest, a Biological Eradication on the California Coast. Eric gave a TED Talk about the Caulerpa Conquest and opened with this quote: We've all seen the movies where a monster created by scientists in a laboratory escapes to wreak havoc on the outside world. But what if the monster was not some giant rampaging beast destroying a city, but just a teeny amount of seaweed with the potential to disrupt entire coastal ecosystem? This is the story of Caulerpa Conquest. Welcome to the show, Eric. We have a lot to deep dive into tonight. So, how you doing?
Hello, David. I'm doing great. I'm doing really good, thank you, and I'm very happy and honored to be part of your program and share what I got to experience. So, thank you for having me. I'm very happy.
Fantastic. Hey, so why don't you go ahead and give us a little shout out about the type of your background and what you were doing, and then kind of just touch a little bit upon the Caulerpa and what that is.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Southern California, kind of in the South Bay, San Pedro, Palos Verdes area of Los Angeles County, and I went to school in San Diego for college, and I've spent a lot of time surfing in Mexico, and then also got to experience a lot of the world through waves and through surfing, and then I got a degree in geography that I was able to use to get a planning job with the city of Del Mar, and then later the city of Carlsbad for 18 years. I was staff planner there, and I learned a lot. I did a lot of stuff I never really knew I could do or would be doing as far as community work, working with zoning and development, trying to make things come out good, environmental review and all that stuff. And it was in that role where I was on the staff of various committees, because there's 3 lagoons in Carlsbad. There's a coastal zone. We set up trails, set up open space, and we did a lot of stuff along those lines. And in that role, I was kind of thrust into this whole little hurricane of Caulerpa, the seaweed coming to our lagoon. And so that's kind of my background. After about 18 years with the city, I went on to have a private planning consulting career, and I did a lot of neat stuff there as well. I helped with the desalination plant in Carlsbad, some hotels, the Port of San Diego. I got to do a lot of neat stuff. I set up a shuttle system and worked with a lot of visitor tourism commercial development down there. But then I also became president of the Lagoon Foundation. I was vice president of the California Surf Museum in Oceanside. And I also work with Wild Coast, which is an environmental group out of Imperial Beach, and they do a lot of really good work in coastal Baja to preserve coastal lands from development, and they work with fishermen and do a lot of good work. So that kind of sums me up real quick. I have a deep love for the ocean, and I like learning from other people and cultures, and that's kind of what set the stage for me to kind of have my world changed by this Caulerpa situation in Carlsbad.
Yeah, I can tell you. I grew up at the beach as well. In fact, you're from South Bay, and so am I. And so I did a lot of surfing as well. I went through junior guard. So the ocean to me is a really important experience and environment. And I know that later in the late 70s and the early 80s, there was a whole Heal the Bay movement, and it's still going. So I know how important this environmental issue is. But there is, just for our viewers out there, our audience, tell us a little bit about this lagoon that's in Carlsbad and what the name is, and kind of a little bit of the history about it. And then let's just kind of dive into what the Caulerpa is.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah. Between San Diego City and Oceanside, North County, there's about 8 different lagoons and estuaries, and it's a really biologically rich area. Agua Hedionda Lagoon translates to stinky waters, and that's what the Spanish missionaries doing their missionary, effort coming up the coast from San Diego, named this lagoon, because it really wasn't the lagoon that you see today. It was kind of more of a slough that really didn't flush out tidally, and it stunk. But then in the 50s, it was dredged, and it was converted to more of a man-made lagoon for the power plant, because the power plant, kind of like in Morro Bay and some other places, they use the cooling function of the ocean water to cool the turbines. And a power plant was built in that lagoon, and the power plant actually owns the lagoon. And that's an important point that you probably picked up from my book, is that all the other lagoons that I mentioned in San Diego County are owned by the state of California. They have a biological mission, but they also have funding problems. But this lagoon, because it's privately owned, is in a different little basket of ownership, and there's profit motive for the lagoon to stay open and healthy by the power plant for the cooling of the turbines. So that kind of sets the stage for this lagoon. It is unique, and it's also unique in that it's the only lagoon in San Diego County outside of Mission Bay near San Diego, where SeaWorld is, where you can actually enjoy the lagoon. You can actually touch it. You can go stand-up paddling. You can go water skiing. You can go sailing. You can go canoeing, kayaking. So it is a public recreational amenity for the region, unlike the other lagoons, which are more like wildlife preserves. So the fact that you can enjoy this lagoon with active recreation is another point that distinguishes this lagoon from the other ones.
And so I know on the ocean side there's a slit with a jetty, so it allows the salt water in. But this lagoon goes back past the 5 freeway and further east. And I guess there's the geography is such that there's the natural drainage from rain comes down off of the hills. Is that correct? And then empties into that lagoon?
Yes, that's correct. Technically, this is an estuary, but, lagoon sounds sexier, I guess, But technically, yes, it's an estuary. And what defines an estuary is that you have the freshwater input on the inland side that then drains to the ocean. So you're absolutely correct, David, that this has that freshwater input, and it goes from freshwater to brackish water to saltwater by the time it has its mouth or its opening to the ocean. And there are 3 different basins that are defined between the coast and the railroad tracks and the freeway, and then east of the freeway. And this Caulerpa, this seaweed was found next to a storm drain on the east inner basin of the lagoon, and the concern was that 1 little centimeter would break off and through the tidal flow get out of the lagoon, basically escape the lagoon, and be in the open ocean. It could go up and down the California coast and then start taking over the reefs and doing what it's done in Australia and Monaco, and it could do it to the California coast. So this threat was not just to this lagoon. it was a very real threat to the California coast to a level that we really did not know or could not define, other than knowing that threat existed.
Right. And so for the listener, Caulerpa is a word that is actually Greek. It's two words put together. The first word is kalos, which means stem, and the second word is erpo, which means to creep. And then there is this particular type of seaweed resembles branches of a conifer, so that's in Latin, that's taxus. And so anyway, it's Caulerpa taxifolio. But this is a very interesting and unique kind of seaweed, and we have it in a natural environment, which is technically, where is the natural environment where the seaweed would be found?
Yeah, and there's actually a good exhibit of the natural environment on the 3-minute animated TED video that I worked on, and it shows up in red, and it's basically a tropical plant as far as the native habitat for Caulerpa taxifolia. It is basically a tropical plant, and it straddles, kind of the equator in the tropical areas. So, the Indian Ocean, parts of the Pacific, and parts of the Mediterranean, not the Mediterranean, but the Atlantic and so forth. So it's basically a tropical plant, yes. And what makes this plant, this version that was developed through selective breeding for an aquarium use, is that it can last in much colder water, much more saltier water, and the range for it to exist is much greater geographically. Instead of dying like at 66 degrees Fahrenheit, this can live through 58-degree water. But more importantly, fish don't eat it, puts out a toxin, and it grows without any control. So the natural version is okay because fish eat it and it's kept in check by natural checks and balances. It's this aquarium strain that's the problem.
So was this genetically modified, or was it just essentially did it go through its own evolution, or how did it kind of become what it is?
Yeah, so the hardcore scientists in the group there's a distinction between genetic modification, where you're actually changing the genomes of the DNA of the plant. In this case, that was not the case here. This was more through selective breeding, and they made it hardier, and they kind of developed it over time at the Stuttgart Zoo in Germany in the 70s, specifically for aquarium use, because what they ended up with was something that was bright green, needed zero maintenance, and it grew really fast, which is the trifecta of an aquarium where you don't want to mess with it. It grows fast and it looks beautiful. The only problem is it belongs in the aquarium. It cannot, be released into the natural environment. I've had friends who are into aquarium use. They say they would buy this plant. It would grow so fast that they would bring it in and trade it in for fish. It basically would overtake an aquarium. So if it could overtake an aquarium with its rapid growth, this genetically selectively bred aquarium strain, if it can overtake an aquarium, it can also overtake a natural environment, and that is what happened and is happening.
Well, it's interesting because when you think about aquariums, you might think of just small aquariums. I know that when I was a boy, I had one as well. I had some fish. But then there's also the aquariums that you would find in San Pedro with the new aquarium there, which is a big aquarium. I mean, really big aquarium. And then there's the one in Monterey Bay, and I know that there's some other aquariums that you would associate with the Mediterranean, but they're big, large, industrial types of aquarium where you have lots and lots of fish. Is that what this was designed for? Was the big aquariums or just for the small aquarium?
So that's a good question. It was originally designed for large-scale aquariums, such as the Monaco National Aquarium in Monaco, which is an absolutely stunning building. It was built by Prince Charles I around the 1900s, in the early 1900s, around the same time the Panama Canal was being built. And it was basically a tribute to his love of oceanography and a collection warehouse of various expeditions around the world. And it was a very large-scale aquarium there. The thing with this Caulerpa taxifolia is that only 1 little centimeter, it's like a little piece of paper, 1 little centimeter can break off and start growing. So the size of the hosting aquarium or the size of the aquarium, whether it's a home aquarium or an institutional aquarium, kind of doesn't matter if there's going to be release of Caulerpa into the natural environment. So in the Mediterranean, it was an institutional aquarium. But in other areas like in Carlsbad and like in Adelaide, South Australia, it was more of a home aquarium that was the initial infestation source. So that's kind of the background on the aquarium use. and the size doesn't matter. But it was originally intended for large-scale aquariums, and when it worked well there, it started being distributed throughout the world for aquaria in home and personal use.
So is this considered a saltwater or a freshwater seaweed? Because it is a version of a seaweed, is that correct?
Yes, it is more of a seaweed type of algae as opposed to like an algae bloom microscopic type of algae. And this is definitely a saltwater seaweed. Freshwater kills it.
So the fact that the lagoon is fresh water and yet it still grew in it, what was going on there?
The freshwater is only near the source of the freshwater input that defines it as an estuary on the eastern end. Very rapidly, it goes brackish and it goes salt. The tides flush in and out based on the moon, of course. The tidal flow, if it's an 8 to 10 foot tidal range or a smaller one, the tides flush way back to where the initial input is into this estuary, and the tidal flow goes way in there, so it goes brackish. It's only fresh by definition of its origin, coming from a watershed that's inland and it's kind of fresh water, but this lagoon and this estuary washes that out really quick, and it's basically and functionally and practically, for all intents and purposes, a saltwater lagoon, a saltwater estuary. It's just fresh and brackish right at the source, but that ends really quick.
So so why is Caulerpa so invasive? And it's actually considered an invasive species. So maybe you can give us a little background on what that means as well.
So an invasive species basically means that it's really not native to the area where it is invading. And the native plants and animals have a really tough time dealing with an invader. And the reason this is an invasive species is because this is an aquarium strain. It is not the natural strain that has tropical areas as its natural native environment. Therefore, where you have this aquarium strain growing, it's an invasive species. And it will grow really fast, and it will smother out and basically create like a blanket of growth over the native rock reef or coral reef, and the native fish and biodiversity gets displaced. That's what makes this an invasive species, because the natural species does not displace natural native biodiversity. It coexists symbiotically because it's part of its native environment. You're either native or you're invasive. And this Caulerpa aquarium strain, definitely invasive.
Okay. In your book, you write, the aquarium strain has no natural predators and secretes toxins that do not affect humans but do impact mollusk, herbivore fish, sea urchins, or submarine flora that would otherwise feed on native Caulerpa and keep it in check. So that's a really important distinction here, is that there's nothing that's keeping this in check. And none of the plants or any of the other sea life are interested in touching this or dealing with it.
That's absolutely correct. There was also something that you. I'm sorry. Yeah, the toxin that it puts out prevents fish from eating it. The natural tropical native strain of Caulerpa taxifolia does not put out a toxin, and fish nibble on it, they keep it in check, and it has its own little growth distribution based on it being part of the natural native ecosystem. This puts out a toxin, and it grows really fast. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Not only does it put out a toxin, it grows like hyperspeed fast. So there's not only nothing to stop it, it grows on its own super fast. So it's like a double hit of badness.
Yeah, in fact, there was, again, in your book, you mentioned that there was a test that was conducted, or an experiment that was conducted, in which Caulerpa was inserted into an aquarium, and it was an isolated sea urchin was placed in the same aquarium, and the sea urchin wouldn't even feed on the Caulerpa. Instead, it practically starved itself and then ate its own waste. So it would rather eat its own waste than the algae, and I just found that just astonishing that it would do something like that, because it was just so averse to this type of plant.
Exactly, and I've actually seen that video, and it's stunning because they show the sea urchin eating other stuff, and then this thing gets dropped in, and it wants nothing to do with it. It's very visual, it's very graphic, and what you described, David, yeah, that's kind of the power of this toxin that nothing wants to eat it. You know, none of the little critters want to nibble on it and eat it. They'd rather starve or eat their own waste. And I saw another video where it ate plastic instead of the Caulerpa. So it's a really incredible thing that got developed just for aquarium use. Aquariums are great, you know, but they're not meant to mix with the natural world. It's kind of a foundational lesson from all this.
Eric, are you is your door closed or anything? Because we're getting some feedback, you know, where there's a lot of chatter kind of in the background or just sharp noise. Is there any wind in the background or anything?
No, maybe I was a little too close to the air conditioner. Sorry. Is this better?
Okay. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, so here we've got a really interesting issue. So we have this Caulerpa, which is doing its own thing, and we have Eric, who is on board with the city planner at the city of Carlsbad. And so something has happened in which you've become aware of environmental issues. And apparently you read two very, very important books. Can you tell us what those books were that really kind of launched you into thinking about environmental issues in a new way?
Yes. Okay, so when I first heard about this Caulerpa situation, and you know, the city manager and my planning director boss, and they're all, you know, hey Eric, go figure out what's going on in the lagoon. There's a seaweed there, you know. So I started talking to the biologists and some of the people involved, and they told me about a book called Killer Algae, and it's written by Dr. Alexandre Munoz, and he's a French biologist, and he's probably one of the smartest people I ever met in my life. And he tried to sound the alarm in France, in Monaco, because he was a scuba diver. You know, some people fish, some people surf. Well, he was a scuba diver, and he scuba dived in front of the Monaco Aquarium for years. It was his local spot, and he started seeing this green thing right outside the outfall, and he tried to get people to say, hey, what's going on? And long story short is he wrote this whole book about a lot of people told him to go pound sand, and they didn't want to hear about it. You know, in part because Jacques Cousteau started that aquarium. He was a general manager for many years, and no one wanted to believe that there was that kind of a problem right there. And his book was very powerful. It's very, very powerful. It's almost sad that someone with so much intelligence, who's very well spoken, with a scientific background, with a calm technical case to be made, ran into political issues, perception issues, funding issues, programmatic issues with coastal management. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Very sobering, and I kind of realized, you know, I'm going to get a little bit of that whole reality coming my way. I could see it, I could feel it. It was a premonition that actually turned out to be true, and it was the reason I was inspired to write my story, because I knew I was going to be challenged. The other book that I also read is called Ocean's End, and I believe it's by Colin Woodward, and he goes around the world and he previews and he overviews all these different environmental issues, whether it's overfishing or it's the breakdown of huge ocean ships on the west coast of India and the environmental issues that go down with that, or radioactivity, or all these different issues. And one of the issues that he actually covered was Caulerpa taxifolia on about 3 pages. He actually interviewed Alexandre Munoz. And I had read that book before Killer Algae, and I thought, wait, I remember reading something, and I went through that book again, and sure enough, I incorporated the pages and the reference into my book, where in Ocean's End, he ran into this, and that was in his discussion on invasive species, because invasive species are a very serious issue, kind of overlooked, but they can do a lot of damage to biodiversity. So those are the 2 books that really kind of set the stage for me to feel like I had to become kind of an environmental warrior and be ready to deal with a lot of challenges, you know, not only the natural but the human stuff.
And once you read the book and then you were looking at the lagoon, you realized you have an environmental issue here on your hand. Is that correct?
Oh, I thought there's no way we'd pull it off. We're screwed. We're done. That's it. They couldn't pull it off in France, in the Mediterranean, with all these amazingly smart scientists. I got to meet so many of them. I was like stunning. I was like just, shamed in their presence. I was just like the city planner guy, and they couldn't pull it off. There's no way we're going to pull it off. I absolutely wrote it off. I thought there's no way. I'm just going to see this thing, to its sad end, and we're going to lose biodiversity. We're going to lose recreation in the lagoon, and property values are going to go down, and we're going to look back one day and say, wow, why the heck could we not save our lagoon? We just followed the same path as the Mediterranean on a smaller scale. I was absolutely convinced of that.
And what changed your mind?
You just got to go into it. And it's...
Okay, so what did you
do? You just got to go into it. I mean, I realized that this was going to be something that was going to really change me, to see the demise of this lagoon. And then I thought, well, then, I'm in this fight with other people as well. And in one of the other lagoons that I was staffed to, there was this guy who I actually kind of give you a little tribute to in my book. And he basically told everyone, look, this is the challenge of our careers. What's at stake is the whole California coastline. We're not playing around. And permit process and protocol and normal stuff, that's all out the window. We have very little time to act. We got to act fast. We got to act correctly. And I started being inspired by some of the people around me. And in a small part of me wanted to reverse what happened in the Mediterranean. And maybe more directly to your question, David, there was a flashpoint to where when I met Alexander Munoz at a conference in San Diego, and I cover this in my book, and this was early on in the fight when it was not looking good, and I gave him a copy of his book to sign for me. And basically what he wrote is, I'm sure you guys are going to pull it off or something like that. And I just thought, wow, this guy's been through so much, denial, rejection, and defeat. And for him to give me a signal of support in my book, I felt touched. I felt knighted. I felt like, you know what? Let's just see this thing to the end and see what happens.
So how did you?
Because if you don't have hope, if there's no hope, then yeah. So I mean, while I say I was shattered, I wasn't so shattered that I wasn't ready to, roll up my sleeves and do my part. Because my biggest challenge that I wanted to have was convince my own city attorney, my own community, my own city manager. They were writing this thing off. I mean, you can't see it. How do you fight something you cannot see? It's kind of like coronavirus. It's this thing floating in the air. All of a sudden, people are getting sick. There's this little plant that grows on the bottom of a lagoon. You can't see it. Eric, what's the big deal? And I knew my challenge is to make them realize the gravity of this. And that first challenge is, I think, where I set the table for me to have this elongated meal of challenges and ultimate success.
And so how did you kind of convince them that this was actually as serious as it really was?
I started sharing with them the defeat of these scientists in the Mediterranean, and look what happened there.
The Mediterranean became the example of what you don't do.
Exactly. I put it on a platform and I said, hey, do we have to live through this? And I would tell them tragedy is the only agent of change. But once in a while, through intelligence, foresight, and vision, maybe you can let someone else live through the tragedy and you actually pull it off. So why don't we try that? And they're telling us what we can and cannot do. They said you cannot touch it. And they gave us some hints early on. But we have to be united with the scientific leading edge of what to do here. And so, yeah, I absolutely challenged our city leadership and the council members. And it was a gnarly process, But I stuck to it.
How long did it take?
I'd say that process maybe a good 4 to 8 months. I think they started getting. When citizens started telling the council about, hey, how come I can't take my boat out? These agencies want to shut down the lagoon. There's no recreational use. By the time the wallets of the citizens started getting hit, then they started calling the council, and then all of a sudden, Eric, just a happy little, surf idiot in the planning department, he's the only one who really understands what's going on here. I started getting a good audience, and I realized it, and I treasured it, and I valued it, and I did not mess with it. I didn't squander it. And I said, look, the agencies are going to come next Tuesday night. They're going to ask for $1 million, and they're going to ask to shut down the lagoon. And they're like, holy crap, there's no way. I go, yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. So before you just say no to them because, we don't have money and we're not going to shut down the lagoon, we have to think of a larger solution of what we do. And that's when the engagement and the dialogue went from emotional to technical. And that's when people started engaging each other. That's when solutions were put on the table from concept to implementation. And I was in the eye of that hurricane. And for that I felt good. And then that's when I started realizing I got to write this up one day.
So once you kind of got people on board and they recognized the dire situation of this, what were some of the first steps that you implemented to start working through this particular problem? Because it seems like on the technical level, you have a fairly large lagoon that has this fairly large amount of seaweed that you need to now eradicate. So who got involved and how did you get the public aware of this? What kind of campaign did you develop on a public relations issue? But also, like, how did you start thinking about it from the point of view of, like, the scientists, and then you got an incredible coalition together?
Yeah, so at this point I have to mention SCAT, SCCAT, Southern California Caulerpa Action Team. And this was led by 4 agencies, and each of those agencies had an absolute hero representing their agencies that formed this coalition. And then there was Merkel and Associates, the consulting biologist. And then there was the city, the power plant as the owner, the Agua Hedionda Lagoon Foundation, and those are the core members of this coalition. And the number one thing was, before we can fight this, we have to map it. So to map it, we need to have these scuba divers that are biologists be able to map it. And it was very hard to map. This lagoon is muddy water. The clarity isn't very good on a lot of days out of the year. So the number one concern was the safety of the divers, just to map it. And what we came up with was an interim plan where we set up the lagoon into different zones. And there was a call-in number. And you would basically have one zone is for the biologist mapping the Caulerpa, and then the other zones would be recreation, whether it was passive or active. And that's how we divided the use of the lagoon. It's very complex. The police got involved. Yeah. Some people were not cooperative, but that's how we started to work out this interactive plan with the community and the scientists to work out mapping it, and then the eradication technique, which is probably another question. But this interactive plan was very innovative, very complex. I won a bunch of awards, and that was the first dialogue between the community, the scientists, and getting things to be attacked in a prudent manner.
You know, the power plant, since it was in the mid-'50s, it took over the lagoon, and they had to keep track of what was going on in the lagoon. So were you able to kind of get into their archives to see what was going on, or how did they help?
Well, this invasive species was really new for everyone. Their archives were more so along the lines of when they would dredge the lagoon, because near the mouth, that would need to be dredged every 2 to 4 years, because the waves would bring in the sand real quick into that outer lagoon segment right near the mouth of the lagoon. The inner lagoon would only be dredged maybe every 15 years. Now, what you're asking is a very good question, because that is what led to discovering the Caulerpa. The last time the lagoon was dredged was in 1998, I believe. And the Coastal Commission and the agencies that approved that dredging made them plant eelgrass, which is the native seaweed, along the bottom of the lagoon in that inland basin. The reason that seaweed is important is because it would stabilize the scouring of the sediment on the lagoon through the high tides, so it would stabilize it from a physical standpoint, but it would also serve as the baseline nursery for the marine life, where the small fish and the larger fish would all be based around this native eelgrass. They had to monitor the growth of that eelgrass over a 5-year period, and it was during one of those follow-up quarterly monitoring efforts for the native eelgrass that they had to plant that then the consulting biologist, Merkel and Associates, found this bright green thing, obviously out of place, and then they started looking into it and realized it was this invasive species.
And that's when they realized that people have been pouring their aquarium into the sewers or into the lagoon directly?
The first infestation was found right at the outfall of a sewer, a storm drain system. I'm sorry, not sewer, a storm drain system. And it's called Hoover Street. And basically what they realized is someone just dumped it into the gutter. And then from the gutter, it went down under the street and into the outfall. And that sequence is actually part of the animation that's in my animated TED video. It's called Attack of the Killer Algae. And the graphic artist, who's also a surf guy from Carlsbad, did a really good job. He graphically shows someone emptying their aquarium into the gutter, goes into the storm drain, and pops out in the lagoon, and then grows without control. Very graphic, but that's exactly what happened. Now, from that point, it started spreading. And that's why the mapping was very critical in keeping it away from the ocean itself.
Did it ever get towards the opening of that channel?
It did. It got underneath the freeway and a little bit into the next basin, but then not. And so it definitely pointed in that direction, and it was very dicey.
So did you set up like kind of a public relations campaign of letting people know that they're not supposed to be dumping their aquarium water out into the sidewalk or into any of the gutters?
Well, we did. Now this was the meat of this was about 2000 to 2003, 4, 5. So it was before Instagram and all the stuff that we have now. So it was a little bit more old school. But we had posters, we had newspaper articles, we had interviews on TV that I was doing. We set up outreach workshops to the neighborhood at Kelly School, the local school right by the lagoon, and it was very well covered. And there weren't a lot of people that were lost on this issue. I mean, property owners wanted their property values. Pro wakeboarders wanted to go in the lagoon, and boaters wanted to use their boat slips. People didn't want to see the biodiversity go down. So there was a public campaign, and that was one of the main things that I was involved in, representing the community, because I had to bridge the community and then the technical scientists. So, I would bring in the police for protection and law and order. I would have the city attorney give a few comments. I would explain the overview, and then the scientists would do their stuff. So it was very interactive, and there was a very robust, for that time period, public outreach campaign. Now it'd be all digital and Instagram and stuff like that. But for that time, yeah, we did every medium that we could.
God, that is just really fascinating. Well, part of the other coalition is that you had the Regional Quality Board of San Diego and Orange County, and then also the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the University of California, Davis. I mean, this is a very, very impressive coalition when you probably got everybody on board and they're all rowing in the same direction.
Exactly. So when I said there was 4 agencies that were the core of SCAT, right, you basically listed them right there. National Marine Fisheries Service, USDA, Department of Agriculture, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and California State Fish and Game. Then we had kind of ancillary entities like the Coastal Commission and the Power Plant and the Lagoon Foundation, and then I represented the city. But those 4 agencies, and each of the 4 people that came out and represented them, in my mind, absolutely heroic. Some of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life. I'm stunned to this day. In fact, they inspired me to, write my story from my perspective. And what validated my role retroactively is when they put together a template and a program for dealing with invasive species, they basically wrote in, you need someone, like Eric, you need someone from the community, you need someone from the city to represent the community and the city government, because if you can't touch ground zero with the city council and the decision makers at the very local level, all the science in the world won't get you the funding or the policy support that you really need it, unless they do an override and they say, you know what, city, you got to step out of the way. This is a national federal emergency, and we're not going to ask you if you want to shut the lagoon down or not. We're going to shut it down for you. And that's actually another flashpoint. When he said, how did I gain the kind of respect and attention of the city, that was a very flashpoint time, and I talk about it in my book. where I was asked out of the blue to go to a management meeting. The city manager wanted to talk to me, and in front of all the managers in the city, kind of putting me on the spot. And he said, well, Eric, what's really going on here with this Caulerpa stuff? Almost putting it down a little bit, trying to downplay it, kind of like saying coronavirus is going to, like, go away on its own, like the seaweed's going to go away on its own, right, Eric? And I said, no, it's not. It's not going to go away on its own. And you know what? The agencies want to shut down the lagoon. They want no recreation. We're going to hurt a diver. And all the propellers from all these jet skis and power boats are going to make the Caulerpa spread even more. And they said, well, we had a city attorney review, and there's no jurisdiction for the city to be involved in shutting down the lagoon. It's either the Coast Guard or Fish and Game, all these other agencies. The fingers were going in every external direction possible. And I said, I understand that, and I respect the work of the city attorney, who, by the way, was also a scuba diver and a friend of mine, and all those relationships, bore fruit when I basically dropped my bomb, and I said, but let me tell you this. Does anyone want to be involved with the lagoon getting shut down by these other agencies? I say we go to the table, we negotiate, and we become part of that process. Because if we say, like the attorney said, there's no jurisdiction, we can't have a voice of closing down the lagoon, then they will shut down the lagoon. And when we want to open it, they're going to say, oh, remember you said you have no jurisdiction, you have no voice. So stay out of the way, we'll take care of it from here. So if we want to be involved in opening the lagoon, we have to be involved in shutting down the lagoon. And at that moment, there was literally gasps from everyone. They just went, wow. And even the city mayor said, wow, I never thought about it like that. And that was for me, the biggest turning point in this whole darn thing.
Yeah, you really kind of had to put a flag in the ground and hold your ground. Hey, Eric, you were kind of going in and out quite a bit on that last passage. So can you maybe just hold your phone up closer to your mouth? Or there was a moment. Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
So there's all kinds of, now we start realizing that, okay, now we have the problem. We're going to have to go through and start dealing with the solution to it. We're not going to shut this down. We don't want outside agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And yet you still need to kind of get funding. So where did the money come from? And then there's also once you got past that level of resistance and that opposition, was there more on the backside of that, or was it more people on board recognizing that this was a really serious issue?
I think more people got on board over time, David. Yeah. There's always some outliers. There's always some people raising issues and not really believing in it. Again, this is not like kelp where it goes to the top and you can actually see it. So you're fighting an invisible enemy. But there's definitely more support from the community. Once we had this plan, we're okay. You can jet ski, or you can kayak, or you can take your jet ski and your water ski in this part of the lagoon for these 3 days. But then it's going to rotate. So the fact that we worked out that recreational use plan made people appreciate the fact that, okay, they're trying to keep it open. And if we had to shut it, we reserved that right. But it never, thankfully, got to that point. There was a lot of updates, and the most critical update was when, the eradication technique. And at some point, maybe I need to explain that. But to this question, David, yes, over time, there was a lot more support. And the newspapers were following us, the TV stations were following us, and there was more engagement and support, yes, between the community and the scientific effort. And for that, I was very grateful.
And then once that started to happen, it seems like your audience became even bigger and wider. So you actually got to meet Christopher Knight, who used to be on the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, so we're jumping ahead just a little bit. I should probably explain about how we got rid of it.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and explain the eradication process, because this is really important.
Yes, it is. What the Mediterranean folks taught us.
What were your methods and what were your tools?
Right. In the Mediterranean, it took them 15 years at least to realize a very foundational thing. You cannot touch it. You cannot touch it. So how do you get rid of something that from the surface you can't see it, and when you scuba dive and you're in front of it, you cannot touch it? a very confounding problem. And what we came up with, to the tribute of the consulting biologists, in consultation with the Mediterranean scientists, because we were in this lagoon environment, we were not in the open ocean with waves and so forth. And the Mediterranean is basically like open ocean. There's waves and wind, and it's tough out there. But we took advantage of our geography of being in a lagoon, and we mapped out the Caulerpa, and we built tarps. We built tarps with PVC framing. We anchored down the edges. We went beyond the limit of each mapped colony of Caulerpa, and that cut off the sunlight, which cut off the growth, which then killed the Caulerpa over time. And for really thick areas, we pumped chlorine underneath the tarp, and it killed everything under the footprint of the tarp. It was a very radical, very, very controversial, just a very radical and almost unaccepted method for people who were worried about all the critters in the ocean were pumping chlorine underneath it. And some of the leading edges and these agents were saying, we have to try everything. They tried everything, and chlorine was at the bottom of the list. It was the last thing in combination with the tarps. But once we did that and we monitored, they took a sample of the soil underneath one of the tarps after several months. It went to UC Davis, and you know what started happening? The native eelgrass started growing out of that soil sample. And that was the second turning point in this whole thing, where we realized our tarp technique, it actually might work. And in the end, it did work. So
that was primarily a trial and error method. Is that correct? That was trial and error?
Well, there was trial and error, but then we realized there ain't nothing else for trial. So we're just going to have error, or we're going to pull it off. And that basically became our technique. We had about maybe 70, 75 tarps throughout the lagoon. And what to do with the tarps at the end was another confounding agency issue. But that was basically our technique. And monitoring, we monitored. The big fear was that one seaweed was going to escape out of the lagoon and into the open ocean. But, yeah, that did not happen. And eventually, the way they declared eradication was when they could not find any Caulerpa for a certain set period of time. And I think it was on the scale of about 2 years. And then they said, okay, it's eradicated. If we find it again, it's a new infestation. But they declared the lagoon a clean bill of health, and that's how it was eradicated. And in that celebration is when I then engaged Hollywood, and then some of that other part of the story now comes into play, where I got to meet another host and another range of absolutely amazing and interesting people, including my good friend Christopher Knight.
Okay, I want to go back to the eradication process. So at the mouth of the opening, as it goes to the ocean, did you have to put some type of net in there to make sure that nothing escaped?
That's a good question, but no. It really didn't go much seaward of the freeway. So it was mainly in that far eastern basin, and that's where all the tarps were. I think there was one tarp on the other side of the freeway, but then that was it. So we were lucky to contain it and act quick enough to keep it east of the freeway. So
and how long was it?
We did not put any kind of net or screen at the mouth of the lagoon, and in reality, it probably would have never stayed anyway, because with the full moon and the tidal range and the gushing water ebb and flowing out, I don't think something like that. Because a net wouldn't even work. 1 centimeter can go through like almost anything. So the net would basically need to be like a screen with no holes in it, and that means the water would flow. It becomes unfeasible real fast.
So when I just think that this idea of putting the chlorine underneath each of these tarps. So what is the tarps, like 20-foot squares or 10-foot squares or 12 or?
I believe they got up to like the larger ones were maybe 40 feet, 40 by 40, 50 by 50, and then smaller ones.
Very large.
Yeah, some got large and some were smaller, and they were tailored to the size of the Caulerpa colony that they were meant to contain and kill.
So once you put the tarps down, then you just injected it, or just kind of started pouring chlorine underneath the tarp, or?
No, there was like a port. There was like a hole at the top of the tarp, and it had kind of like a vacuum cleaner hose adapter, connection point. And the tarps that were close to shore, they would pump it from a shoreline station, and the tarps that were out in the middle of the lagoon, they would pump the chlorine from a boat.
Now, would the chlorine start kind of filtering through the entire lagoon, or was it somewhat contained underneath that tarp?
It was pretty much contained within the tarp, and a lot of people are very happy about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No kidding.
That these are thick tarps, and they were anchored down with sandbags, maybe 6-10 feet beyond the edge of the Caulerpa colony, and they were sandbagged down as kind of airtight as they could be. And there was some incidental seepage, for sure, but for the most part, the lagoon didn't fill up with chlorine. No, I mean they were pretty functionally contained to the footprint of the tarp.
Was there any other collateral damage?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there was.
Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
Anything under there, a seashell,
Everything
a fish, a stingray, yeah. Everything under the footprint of the tarp would die, and that's part of the controversy of using this technique.
And so,
but there was no alternative. There truly was no other alternative.
You developed this technique of the tarp and the chlorine, and it worked. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Not me personally. Our team did. The scout did.
Right. That's what I mean when I say you. Kind of the whole group. Okay. So.
Right. Exactly.
And but then as far as like having to literally like pick each one up or take each piece out, did you have to do anything like by hand? Almost like you're sowing and tilling the land at all? Did you have to do any of that?
No, because you didn't want to touch this Caulerpa again. So once it was mapped, they made the size of the tarp frame out of PVC piping to fit the colony it was going to contain and kill. Then they put a tarp over it, and then they had the chlorine pumped. Now, the chlorine was for really thick areas because the tarp itself cut off the sunlight. That in itself killed a lot of the Caulerpa. But for areas where it was very thick, they needed to go in and have this additional, weapon of the chlorine to just really kill the thick areas of Caulerpa.
Wow. Okay, so once you were tarped, how long did it take for the Caulerpa to die off?
I think that was on the scale of months where it finally died off. Based on the thickness of how much was under there.
Yeah, so no sunlight and chlorine. This seaweed was that resistant, was super resistant.
It took a lot to kill it. Yeah,
wow.
It took a lot to kill it. And those are two pretty extreme things, exactly. I mean, I remember meeting scientists who are phycologists, which is, the study of algae and seaweeds. Only reason I know that word. And they were absolutely amazed and stunned at this aquarium strain and how hardy it was. I mean, one guy talked about putting it in his little bucket in his garage. He forgot about it. Months later, came and put it in seaweed, and it started growing again, no problem. I've heard amazing stories of how hardy this seaweed is. It's almost like, and when I would go talk to school kids, I would say it's like Frankenstein. He kind of looks human, but he's kind of not, and you shoot him with a gun, he just keeps walking, that's what this was. It was truly like a monster. Like you opened your show with that quote.
Yeah, that's a very good quote. I mean, very well written. Okay, so now that we have, so once you got some of the people in Hollywood involved, and you think that everything was everything dead at that point, or was there some other role that they were playing?
Look, everything was dead. We had formally declared it eradicated, and when just real quick, when I was in the midst of this battle, I really put a personal challenge on my shoulders to tell everyone about the battle that we were in. And I'm going back just real quick, David. Before it was eradicated in 2006 and 2002, I went to a conference in New Zealand, the first joint conference of Australian and New Zealand city planners. And for people who know Australia and New Zealand, for the Australians and the New Zealanders to get along, it's almost a bit of a hard mission. A little bit of comedy, but there's a little bit more to it there as well. And this was the first conference where the Australian and New Zealand city planners were getting together. I was one of 3 American speakers to go down there, and I spoke about Caulerpa because I felt like I needed to go on this pilgrimage, kind of like Alexandra Muniz, and say, hey, you guys don't get this because, we have it. And the wetlands in Australia are amazing, and they're infected with it, and it's very sad. And Adelaide, Australia got it months after I spoke. So I was very aware of the public speaking and the community outreach that you needed to do to alert the problem to it. So when we got it eradicated, now in 2006, I had left the city in 2005. I was a private planning consultant, but I was also the president of the Lagoon Foundation, and I wanted to make sure that the day this was eradicated, I wanted to be kind of in the driver's seat of this important community group as president to now work with the council and all these people that were my former bosses and so forth. Now I'm just in the community, but you know what? We're going to celebrate the heck out of this, and boy did we. And I set up Lagoon Days. I had the full support of the manager, city manager, the mayor, everyone. I mean, this was a huge thing, and that I wanted to share that story, and that's how we got Hollywood involved. We did fishing events, we did runs, we put a spotlight on this, and I had my own little challenges just doing that. But anyway, that's what drove me to do the outreach on this lagoon after it was eradicated.
So maybe you can kind of talk, since this is like a local issue. And it wasn't just that lagoon, was it? Was there the other lagoons in Southern California also affected by this Caulerpa outbreak?
There was one other location in Huntington Harbor, also through an aquarium release into the local waters. This is more of a yacht boating harbor basin, and it did not have a direct link to the ocean. It did, but it was very distant, and it had a lot of distance to the open ocean. It wasn't a direct shot like our lagoon, and it was much more contained. It was smaller in scope and a much smaller area that actually had the Caulerpa. But that was the second location, and they also enjoyed an eradication success. But those are the only 2 in California. It's more than a local issue, obviously, because they have it from north of Sydney down around the corner to the coast of New South Wales and South Australia all the way to Adelaide. It's in 8, 9 Mediterranean countries, and counting. And so it was a local challenge and a local issue. But if it were not for the international dimension of coordination and inspiration and seeing what happened and did not happen there, we would have fell on our face super fast.
Tell me, did you have to go through the same procedure with the tarps and the chlorine in the Huntington Harbor?
Yes, we did set up some tarps and some chlorine there, and it was very smaller and much smaller in scale, and they were able to keep a good handle on it. And they did actually have some screens between some of the waterways because it was a much more man-made environment. While our lagoon was man-made in the fact that they dredged out these deep 3 basins, it's otherwise natural. In Huntington Harbor, it's a maze of yachts, and it's like a big marina with boats and stuff, and channelized waterways with concrete screens between the 2 that actually filtered and controlled the tidal flow for the boats that were in them. So it was a much more controlled man-made environment, but nevertheless, they did have the Caulerpa. The interesting thing with the Huntington Harbor location, it was such a man-made area that it was kind of an artificial environment for stingrays. It was like the bottom was covered with hundreds, thousands of stingrays, and the divers were always getting stung, and they had to deal with the stingrays there just to lay the tarps and map the Caulerpa out there. So they had this weird kind of artificial stingray environment that was a thorn in their side, quite literally. They laughed about it later, but stingray's no fun either.
Oh, well. Okay, so once you eradicated the Caulerpa, did you bring back the natural seaweed, and then did you also repopulate the lagoon with fish?
No, the native eelgrass started coming back on its own. So nature, given a chance, will bounce back. That's why you need to have the native biodiversity healthy and in place. And if you compromise that baseline with invasive species, it will not bounce back. In our case, it did.
And then also, were you able to kind of get people, the general population on board not to empty out their aquariums into the sidewalks and into the gutters and into the lagoon? Is there
I think over time, sure, people got the message. I've spoken to almost every community group you can think of, from the Rotaries to the Lion, to the League of Women Voters, Young Republicans, the Sierra Club, the Surf Rider, and school kids. And I tell you, the most inspiring for me was talking to fourth graders, because they would almost get bored hearing the message about don't put it in the storm drain. I mean, they got it. They were hearing it so young and so early on that they got it. And they were kind of like, well, of course you don't do that. And I was okay, well, great. Well, I guess I don't need to go into that so much. So the whole mindset of not having a connection between an aquarium and the natural environment, I think that did come out, because every article in the paper would make a point of that, and they would also cite the Mediterranean source, the Monaco Aquarium, this large aquarium under Jacques Cousteau, let out the seaweed, and then it started spreading. So that really is a universal foundation of this whole thing. There's a couple of them, David, but this is definitely one of them. You have the aquarium, freshwater or saltwater. You don't put that stuff in the natural environment. I think in my book I talk about different examples of invasive species, and there's a lake, I believe in Colorado, where a guy put in a handful of goldfish, and over 3 years that lake had thousands, like tens of thousands of goldfish that overtook that environment. There's no trout, there's no native fish, the native grasses went away. So it really is an important message to don't saltwater, freshwater, or anywhere else. You have something in your aquarium, you don't release it. Now there's some cultures that have a ceremonial release, and they have the stonefish in the Chesapeake Bay that had some I think some Asian roots as far as the cultural release of the stonefish. And this is a fish that can almost walk on land. It flops, and it'll cross the road and go into another area. I've seen videos of it. It's absolutely stunning. It's like, are you kidding me? And then there's the Asian carp in the Mississippi River system that was grown in a fish farm, and the fish bit a hole in the netting, and then they escaped, and now they're up and they're threatening the Great Lakes. So the Great Lakes are under threat from an Asian carp that got released from some Mississippi River fish farm in the Southern Reach, and it's absolutely stunning, the reach of these invasive species, how far they can go. A science fiction writer cannot come up with the reality of what's going on in some of these situations. It's just absolutely true and stunning, but sobering and sad. And there's kind of no end to it. I mean, Captain Cook brought rats to the Polynesian Islands, and it hasn't stopped since. But with our vectors of transportation being so rapid and so modern, this world shrunk, and the invasive species are along for the ride. It's very, very serious.
Yeah, and this is a really serious issue because it's a global problem, and it's not just Caulerpa, as you were saying. It's other types of species like fish. I know here in Arizona we have a buffalo grass that was brought in to stabilize the soil, and it turned out that this is a very wild type of plant, and it's prone to fires. And so when the fires come, it just burns it up really quickly. So, and we've been having serious problems up here in the Catalina Mountains right now with a fire that has been raging for 5 weeks. It's now kind of they finally got a handle on it, but it took a long time for it to finally get to that point. But there's a lot of issues when it comes to environmental issues, and it's not just the Caulerpa issue, but you're really kind of touching upon a much bigger issue of what we need to be doing as a species to start curbing some of our excesses.
Well, exactly, and at this point, I have to quote something that was very profoundly said to me by my good friend Christopher Knight, Peter Brady, and he says, we are the invasive species. We're the ones that are going to wipe out our own home and our own planet by all the silliness that we're doing of playing a chess game with biodiversity and putting things where they do not belong, creating things, genetic mutations, biogenetics, this and that, tomatoes that come out of a test tube. Who knows where it's going to end and what the stop and the starting point are. And we are the species that are at peril for ourselves. We are our own worst enemy in that sense. And that's a tough message to communicate, because there's some good, with medicine, cutting edge, science and all that stuff. But when you come to the biological reality of life and you start playing with that, that can get very risky, and sometimes it doesn't turn out good. A lot of times it doesn't turn out good. I mean, this was just developed for an aquarium use, just to have an aquarium look pretty with no maintenance, and It's absolutely messing up, coastal areas. And there's a cousin to. I liked your overview up front about Caulerpa, the Greek origin, and taxifolia. Well, there's another one, Caulerpa racemosa. And it's basically like a grape-like morphology or shape to the Caulerpa. And what the scientists in the Mediterranean taught me, when I went there as the research for my books, I went to Ground Zero. I went to Monaco. I went to France. It was life-changing. I also got a chance, by the way, to go to Italy. And I went stand-up paddling through the canals of Venice for a week, and it was stunning. And I got to surf in Sardinia, and it just expanded my whole world, because I was just following this Caulerpa, and it led me to all these other different things that enriched my life as just an ocean person or a surfing person, But the point here is that the scientists are saying, hey, Caulerpa taxifolia, that's like the Hollywood, version. That's like the real popular one. But racemosa is more dangerous, is doing more damage, and nobody even knows about it. So there I was, at the Mediterranean Institute of Oceanography in Marseille, France, overlooking this stunningly beautiful area, realizing that what I had been chasing really isn't, like, quote, the problem. Its cousin is the real problem. And it's moving around through ballast water exchange and all these different ports, and it grows asexually, so it can grow way more rapid, much further reach than just the fragmentation of Caulerpa, because the fragmentation is limited to where it can flow through currents. This other method just explodes with growth and has a much wider area of impact, infestation, and distribution. And they're going, we don't know how to get anyone interested in this because it's not taxifolia. This is just racemosa. No one wants to hear about it, but its damage is far greater to the environment. So I was trying to shoot down. I was trying to find a AK-47, and these guys are saying, no, this is like a nuclear bomb, and this is the real damage. This is the real weapon of damage. All I could do was give it mention in my book, and because it almost took me out at the knees.
I know that when I was, I think in the back of your book you have a map of the Mediterranean and dots where this particular Caulerpa is, and I was just shocked at just the proliferation. It is on both the African coast, it is on the European coast, and it's as far east as Cyprus. So so what are some of the things that are going on with the Mediterranean and those countries, and how are they trying to eradicate this species? And there's a number of obstacles that they're facing, which is you have all the immigration issues, you have the terrorist issues, and all of these are starting to impact the amount of resources that they have to be able to fight this other type of, problem.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because in our case here in California, we had a very linear path of just trying to get rid of it. We had huge funding issues and other issues and so forth, but we didn't have waves of immigrants coming across the Pacific Ocean, like from Catalina Island or from, other locations, and literally invading our shores through a humanitarian crisis of these people needed help. I mean, these are human lives. So this is, way more important than just, the environment. These were people that were fleeing, their own civil wars, their own persecution for their way of life. And back then, you don't hear about it so much anymore, but when I was 2015, 16, 17, the immigrant issue was absolutely challenging all of the government agencies, all of the funding. And when you go through those agencies and the funding, ocean resource protection, okay, you might be on the list, but you're like, number 17 out of the top 5. And terrorism, the Paris bombings, okay, took out a good friend of one of the scientists I met with in Marseille. The Nice bombings that literally happened months after I walked on that boardwalk. The reality of what they have to deal with to have a safe street, a safe community, or a safe country, whether it's the challenge of immigrants or the violence of terrorism, which is such a sad thing. I mean, every religion in my mind is good. I've been to Indonesia, and the Muslim religion, it's amazing, it's enchanting, it's wonderful. But every single religion has a radical component that spoils it for the masses. And the radical terrorism stuff that was going on when I was writing my book, when these scientists were telling me, Eric, how hard it is to get funding when you have terrorism, you got people getting blown up at the cafes, when you have waves of immigrants coming. So they are extremely challenged. And that's why all the intelligence in the world, all the best science in the world, all the money in the world, if you don't have the funding, the policy, and the science working all three in unison, there is no chance. But if you don't have a healthy environment, you don't have, healthy mountains, oceans, rivers, and oceans, and what's the platform for people to live? It can't just be concrete and a roof and an underground bunker,
Exactly.
So we that's the whole problem right there. There has to be environmental stewardship.
Are the Mediterranean countries, are they able to kind of get a handle on any of these invasive species, or is it just now running rampant to the point where there's really no return?
The scientists are absolutely scratching their head, and then they're also trying to convince a lot of their agencies and their government and their political leaders that global climate change is actually happening. They're saying, Eric, we've mapped it. It's a reality. The oceans are warming. The things are changing. The biodiversity is moving around, and so they're trying to fight for validation of something like global climate change. And then these invasive species, it's not as sexy or as big as sounding as something like that. And so, no, they are definitely losing the battle. I mean, I say somewhere in there that the Mediterranean is like the cradle of ancient civilization. That's a very modern problem with invasive species. And no, flat out, they're basically losing. There's over 500 marine invasive species in the Mediterranean Sea alone. And all they're really doing is where it does not exist, these invasive species, or at least some of them, like the Caulerpa or whatever, they're setting up sanctuaries. And then how do they protect the sanctuary? And how do they have protocols and policies and funding and education and outreach and maybe some structures, but even that's hard, to secure a sanctuary. So all they're really left with, they're kind of writing a lot of areas off, and there's few little jewels, few little sanctuary areas, and okay, well, here we don't have it. But that's the minority. The world is getting remapped. That's why the chapter on my book is The World According to Invasive Species. Kind of sad, actually. That's why I wanted to really put a spotlight on our little victory here in Carlsbad.
Right. I mean, that's the shining light, and yet it was manageable because of the size. But when you start dealing with the scale of the Mediterranean Sea, we're dealing with, magnitudes of millions, right?
We were blessed with geography of the location, being in a lagoon, not being subject to waste. So we were lucky with geography. We were lucky with the example of the failure, the missed opportunity of the Mediterranean, because they could have done stuff, but they flat out did not because of the political elements outweighing the scientific elements. Flat out, read Killer Algae. Very sobering, very real story, written by a super smart guy. And the third thing we had for us was our response. For some weird cosmic reason and the confluence of opportunities that led this reality is we capitalized on our geography, we implemented the benefits of the lessons learned or lost from the Mediterranean, and we were basically put on a pedestal by all these other scientists. I mean, there's an international conference I talk about in my book when I first met Dr. Alexander Munoz, and there were scientists, like I was saying, from France, from Italy, from Croatia, from all the Mediterranean countries, from New Zealand, from Japan, from Australia, from Brazil, right? And they basically put us on a pedestal and said, we want you guys to pull it off. We think if anyone can, you guys might actually be able to pull it off. You guys might be able to do it. And so yeah, that's kind of my story, and that's what we did. But we had geography, we had the Mediterranean as a template, and we had our response, which was rapid and scientifically based, and somehow it got funded and supported.
And you put together a very constructive action plan. So, there's a lot of things that were working in your favor, and you made quick, decisive actions and decisions. And I think obviously that's kind of the basis of almost everything. You have to have some wisdom and look at a situation and going, if this continues, it's going to get way out of proportion, and at that point, it's going to be really difficult to deal with it. In fact, you even mentioned, I think in your book or in us talking, that when you have an environmental problem and it reaches an economic impact on your society, then at some point you're too far gone and it's too late to help resolve the problem. And that was a very
idea. I did come up with a little phrase for that. That by the time there's an economic impact, there is no environmental solution, and I would kind of like repeat that to the decision makers, to everyone else. Don't let it get to that point. In my book, I cite a bunch of examples in Australia where like $500 million fishing industries were impacted because Caulerpa spread, and it affected their commercial fishing stock. And what can they do now? It's moved offshore, or it's not the same, or there's a dislocation. There's a missed opportunity, and you cannot go back to square one sometimes and go back up and rebuild.
Exactly.
And so it's very sad. These estuaries that I went and visited in 2008 in Australia, south of Sydney. Someone wants to take a good trip, man. Go 3 hours south of Sydney, and it's the most amazing wetlands, and there's kangaroos hopping around. There's koala bears in the tree. Oh, but now they have Caulerpa in the wetlands, and some of the most prolific fishing grounds. And these wetlands are so beautiful, and there's no biodiversity like there once was, because Caulerpa came, it spread, and it's kind of messed up. So now they just like, you can't do this, you can't do that. And
that's on the invasive species side. I mean, you think about the BP oil spill and what happened in the Gulf of Mexico and what they had to do there. And I know that I have friends from Louisiana, and they just said the fishing industry was just devastated.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. There's so many environmental issues, like oil spills, or the radioactivity in the water, or plastics. I mean, you could do a whole program just on the plastics and stuff, Dr. Munoz, he told me, look, plastics are very bad, but invasive species, it's much worse. But he says they're almost not even worth mentioning in the same sentence. The impact of invasive species on natural environments is kind of overlooked. It's not become accepted, but people are just numb to it because, well, what are you going to do? You can't go back and like regrow this or regrow that. The baseline is too far removed from reality. It is out of reach. It can never come back. And so that's why there's so few success stories with invasive species, and even fewer in the ocean marine environment. That I just had to put all this together. I felt compelled. It was a weird inner drive within me to tell my story, because I felt like from the technical science community to the emotional, community living around it, the global reach with the local application. I was in the eye of this hurricane, and it just did something to me. And I would say to my friends, and I would actually say to a couple public speaking audiences, I guess this one right now with everyone listening on the radio or the podcast and stuff, hey, Caulerpa, it not just affected the Mediterranean and Australia and our lagoon. You know what? It affected me. It infected me. It got inside me. It changed me. It opened my eyes. It opened up a lot inside of me. It opened my world too.
How did this experience kind of go through and reshape your way of thinking and recalibrate your worldview?
On one hand, it reaffirmed a lot of things that I already knew, that the world is very connected. All humans, regardless of culture, are the same. You're going to deal with human nature regardless of what someone believes or does or works at, or language, or what tongue they speak in and stuff. Humans are humans. That's universal, and the world is very connected. But this really reaffirmed that for me in a lot of ways. But I think the way it changed me is that it made me look at loss of a way of life or loss of an environment in a real sensitive manner. Because I literally cried for this lagoon. I was interviewed by the San Diego Reader, and I said that, and that was like the quote of the article. I wept for the lagoon. So if you look up, I wept for the lagoon. I think like it pops up online. So I told the guy, I like crying. And this was even before stand-up paddling. I was just kayaking. I'm mainly into surfing. I almost, to be honest, actually get like a little bored in the flat water of the lagoon. But, I enjoy it. I like it. I'm trying to be open-minded and not just be, just freaked on waves all the time. So in my version of being an open mind, and I thought, we're going to lose kayaking, and they're going to lose jet skiing, and they're going to lose wakeboarding and all this stuff, and the lagoon's going to get shut down. And just what a shame, And that like I had like an emotional hit on that, But then to turn the boat around and actually like be part of a larger story where we pulled it off. Oh, that's empowerment. That was just like an external source of inspiration that's affected me internally for sure, and when I talk to people, and I wrote the book, it's a gnarly story, but for us we had a positive ending, and things don't always turn out good, but for us it did. If you just hear bad news all the time, you don't celebrate the good stuff, So that's what it taught me. The world is connected, human nature is the same, and you've got to celebrate the victories, no matter how small or how large, because they can multiply and they can grow on each other. And the world can't just be negative and dismal and a loss and defeat all the time. That you may as well go live in a concrete in an underground bunker at that point,
Just hunker down and wait for something. Well, you did something really remarkable. I just really have to, take my hat off to you and just salute you for the work that you and your team did to deal with this. But at the same time, you decided to take another action plan and write your book. So how did you map out your book? And since I'm a writer too, I know what it takes to start thinking about what the mechanics are of writing a book. And I know how difficult it is to write a book. And you wrote a very well-written book, and it's very exciting, and it's very informative. How long did it take? And, how many hours would you put in a day, or when would you do it?
Wow, well, I really appreciate that question, and I have a really good answer for it. In general terms, I'd say the whole book took me maybe 6 years to write, and I started realizing that I need to capture other milestone, this other thing that's still going to happen. And then towards the end, I realized, you know what? I have to make my pilgrimage to Monaco. I have to go to Ground Zero myself and to France. I have to reconnect with Dr. Munoz, and I have to add that level, because I'd already been to, you know, Australia and New Zealand and all that stuff, and I spoke in Washington D.C. I've been up and down California, but this book is, my story's not complete unless I go to Ground Zero. I had to make my own, you know, trip to Mecca, to my own pilgrimage to Monaco, and I knew I needed to get the book out before the 10-year mark, or concurrent with the 10 years anniversary of it being declared eradicated. It was declared eradicated July 12, 2006, and I knew if I wait more than 10 years to tell my story, which is going to go back 15 years, then I blew it. And so that was my end point, and it actually got published, you know, in spring, I believe, of 2016. And so for the 10-year mark of the Caulerpa eradication, I did a lot of stuff in the community and all that stuff, and I was very happy with that. Now, the mechanics of writing the book, that's a great question, and this might actually help other people who are going to have a similar endeavor up their sleeve. When I was on city staff, starting in 2000, and the history of it, I had in my mind somehow, and in my own, you know, dumb way, I was realizing that I need to save every city action that I do to council, every newspaper article, and I'm going to save them by year. And then I'm going to come back someday, and I think I'm going to write a book about it. I'm going to write my story. But, yeah, you know, everyone talks about that, and okay, fine. But I did that, and I had folders of all this stuff. And this isn't digital. This was like, you know, pre-internet. Now you look it up online, all that stuff. This is, I mean, cutting out papers, saving articles, all these different things. My agenda bills to city council, all the city planning maneuvers. And I have them year by year. I actually have them labeled 2000, all the way up. And then one day I said, I'm going to put them in order. So I went January to December. And then I started like writing it. I wrote this and that. Here's my chapters, and I did my table of contents, and here's all the chapters. And I had my book outlined in chapter form. I had the hardcore data year by year. And then once I started writing parts of it, then I would put it down. I'd have my life. Things got in the way, this and that. But I would read what I wrote sometimes months prior, and I go, wow, I wrote that. Well, you know, I got to finish it. I got to keep it going. I didn't even feel like I wrote it. I tried to write it so it would be timeless, and I would not be bored at a future date to read what I wrote months prior, if that makes sense. I tried to almost, you know, future-proof it, if you will, with the style and my storyline, so that it would always seem fresh every time I read it. And when I would read the little pieces that I wrote prior, that like inspired myself to do it. But then realized I needed to go to Monaco, and I just, you know, I went to Hyperdrive, and I went on that trip in 2015, and then I said I got to finish it by by fall, and then I went and did like the production mode with agent and so forth. So that's kind of a long answer as to how I mechanically wrote it and laid it out, but it started by me saving everything year by year, which I actually look back and I almost kind of can't believe I pulled that off and thought about it and actually did it. And a lot of those things are actually in my book.
Yeah, when you started to look at all of the information that you gathered, you must have said kind of in your mind, wow, look at all this information. I mean, it's not just my experience anymore. I mean, there is an enormous amount of information out there, and I'm sifting through it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm recognizing the importance of it all. You know, so then at some point you have to start putting it all in categories and subcategories and, you know, shaping it that way. At least that's what I would imagine.
No, totally. And the only thing that saved me was taking a chronological approach. That's why my book is divided up by years, and I gave every chapter a year or a range of years with the title of what happened in that year. And then I'm for some reason, you know, thanks to my parents or I'm blessed with a good memory, and I was able to recall a lot of stuff, how I felt, what I said, my little maneuvers, my humor, or my lesson, or my challenge, and all that stuff. And then for some reason I don't have a writer's block, so I was able to throw it out, and I'd put it on paper, then I'd refine it, and I'd labor over the word choice and the sentence structure, but the message was real clear and actually easy for me to put. And it was a chronological approach that saved me, starting in 1998 all the way through 2015.
Yeah, it's really important to have like an armature to put everything on and knowing how it all flows.
Yeah, but and like you're saying, I started no one has all of this different type of information that I have. The newspapers have this, the city records have that, the scientists have this, but no one had a little bit of everything the way I did, because no one was in the eye of the hurricane the way I was. From city staff, community, the science people, and then president of the Lagoon Foundation, and then on my own little personal mission to go like kind of not around the world, but definitely foreign conferences, Washington, all that stuff. No one had all those different non-connected on the surface pieces that I had, and no one had all those references, and so I wanted to make my book like a one-stop shop where if I lose all my files, I have my book. This book, I don't need anything more than my book now to tell the story, and all these oversized files that I had before, it's all contained in this nice tight little book now. My story is also reference style warehouse of information on this, and I loaded up everything that I did that I could think of and that I would want in there. Yeah,
well,
I kind of still can't believe I did it sometimes. Just like to be honest on a little human level.
I know what it means. I know what it means to write a book, and it's a feat, because you pour all your heart and soul into it, and it represents who you are and what you're thinking. So when did you end up writing the Peli Can Surf book?
Oh man, so I think I did that just in the last year or so. I've seen more dolphins and pelicans than I can ever count in my life, and I don't know. I just somehow the storyline came into my head about a pelican. When they fly over the waves, they're always over the swell. And
yeah.
As a surfer, you always fantasize a lot of silly things. And I go, wow, what if the pelican actually got barreled? What if the pelican got in the tube and came out? I mean, why not, right?
Well, in a funny way, when you watch them, they actually do surf those waves.
They do surf the waves. They kind of ride the swell, and they absolutely ride the waves. They do. They ride the waves, and then when it starts to break, they go up and they go to the wave behind it, and it's an absolutely mesmerizing thing. But in my mind, I took it further to where now they're actually technically and truly riding inside the tube. And I thought, well, how's a pelican going to do that? Well, when surfers get in the tube, a lot of times they'll stick their hand in the wave. They'll slow their board down, and they'll let the wave pass them up, and then they'll release, and they will come out of the tube. So in my storyline, I have this cute little pelican girl who's born with a left wing that's all tweaked. It's all bent weird. She doesn't know it's weird, but everyone else laughs at her because she looks weird with her wing. So she has to go and fly alone during the day. And one day she sees the surfers using their arms to slow down and get inside the barrel. She goes, I can use my messed up wing, the wing that's bent, I can use it to slow down and get barreled. And so she becomes a tube rider. And she goes back to her local beach, and when the waves are huge, no one else wants to surf, and she goes out at her local beach and she puts on a tube riding display and becomes a community leader, survived the bullying, and then everyone else bends their wings when the pelicans fly in formation. They put her in front, and all the other pelicans bend their wing in her honor. And I want her to go as a storyline since she goes and surfs with dolphins and then with whales. And I want her to be like an environmental warrior for kids to realize that you need to take care of the oceans. You need to take care of the world, and the animals can help you do that. And my character, Peli, she's Peli. I just took pelican and broke it up. From pelican, Peli's her name, Peli Can Surf, and that's how I came up with the name of the book and the character. But I would love if someone wants to help me sell this to Disney or something. That'd be great. I mean, I would love her to be like an environmental child empowerment type of character to overcome bullying, overcome your personal challenges, and actually turn it into something beautiful and unique. And that's my Peli Can Surf story, which is also on Amazon next to my book, I guess, the one we're talking about now.
It's an endearing type of a story, It's an endearing story. So you're also
and the lady who drew it is an amazing artist. She took what was in my head through our discussions, and she more than exceeded what I had in my mind of what Peli would look like, and everything I described. What she drew in my mind, the artistry and the illustrations outdo my story. Easy. They work in combination, of course, but her talent is amazing. Her name's Bonnie Bright, and she's actually out of New York now, and she's an amazing artist. And what she did, we are ready to write the 4 next stories of Peli. We just it's just sitting there online now, but she would be a powerful character, and it would just be amazing. There's TED Talks at the end of my 5-story program that I have for Peli. She starts SHRED Talks, and SHRED is an acronym, and SHRED stands for Showing Humans Responsible Environmental Decisions, and that's what Peli brings to the world. She brings the humans and the animal worlds, to look at invasive species, the oil spills, the plastics, and she puts a lighthearted but impactful, inspirational character viewpoint for all these issues, and she can go around the world and enjoy and surf beautiful waves at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important story about the nature of stewardship.
Exactly. And she can cover, the bullying, the social, community aspect all the way to the environmental issues. Yeah, and all the kids in my neighborhood, they look at Peli. She's endearing. I have some friends who are already. I have friends who are already designing, the keychains and the hats and the stuffed animals. But I would love to launch, Peli as a character.
Merchandise. It's all merchandise. Good for you.
Oh yeah. I have a team working on that right now.
Obviously, surfing and the ocean are very important to you, and I find that the ocean is very magical. But you are the vice president of the Oceanside Surf Museum, so I've been there. I think it's a beautiful museum there tucked into Oceanside, downtown Oceanside. And you have like the whole history of surfing, and you have all the boards to show it. And the exhibition that I saw was surfing in Vietnam during the Vietnam War at Da Nang.
Yeah, that was one of the most powerful and emotionally rewarding exhibits that we had. It's actually the California Surf Museum, located in Oceanside, right? And you can look at surfmuseum.org. And that Vietnam exhibit, we literally had guys who had surfed in Vietnam, been to Vietnam, and they said, no one ever said thanks to us when we came back. Everyone just wanted to give us crap, for that whole war situation, and people were moved by that exhibit like I've never seen before. But our museum is
kind of a tribute to them. Yeah, so it was more of a tribute to the veterans of Vietnam.
Exactly, and kind of showing how for their sanity, they had this surfing element. I know surfing and surfers, guys and girls, all of us, you do it. But it's a good thing too, And if we can spread the joy of water and surfing around, that's not a bad thing. That is not a bad thing. And like right now, for example, I'm working with a partnership of surfers. We bought the Wet and Wild Water Park in Palm Springs, and we're going to bring surfing to Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley right now. That's kind of like the new chapter of my life right now, where it's an amazing thing. All my experience of the community work, all that stuff we have out here in the Coachella Valley, with indigenous Indian and Mexican kids, and people kind of overlook them, and we're showing them a lot of love and attention. They're starting surf clubs in high schools now, out here. And there's cultural change that's going on. Our wave is still being tested. We're using some of the newest technology in the world. You can look it up online on the Palm Springs Surf Club on YouTube, and there's a bunch of clips from a bunch of pro guys. But we also have the ability to make smaller waves. We brought kids from Watts out 2 weeks ago. Little kids where their parents have challenging, tough lives, and these are the innocent kids in the 8 to 12-year-old range who half of them couldn't even swim. And when they saw these waves coming, they changed their lives in a good way. We showed them the joy of riding water and being wet and being happy. That's nothing wrong with that.
You know, there's something, you know, when I grew up and you grew up, you had to go surf out there in the wild blue ocean here, you know, with the storm surfs and hurricane surfs and the big waves, the small waves. And, you know, it was, I kind of look back on it and going, boy, that was, in a sense, that was really dangerous. And so in one regard, you know, especially when you get into big surf and you get into the undertows and you get into having to learn how to manage yourself in waves that are breaking in front of you and you're not even, you know, you're paddling out, you know, so you have to kind of learn how to do all that. And one of the things that's kind of fascinating with the Palm Springs Surf Club is that you don't have to go through and deal with all that danger. You seem to be just able to go right to a spot, almost like a reef break, where you can just kind of paddle into the wave from the side versus having to go out, you know, through all the waves in the front. So it's
you're absolutely right.
It's not as dangerous and it's not as threatening. You know, I have been out. My brother and I, we got to go into Camp Pendleton, and it was a big day that day. We got to go on the base, and there were a lot of Marines that had no business being out there in the surf. And I just thought at some point they're going to kill themselves because they just don't know how to handle themselves. You know, so not only did they not know how to handle themselves, they went out into surf that was way too big for them. And I can't imagine, you know, what it would be like just to try to learn how to surf in waves that are way too big for you. You know, you don't even know how to paddle, and yet you're trying to, you know, go into a 10-foot faced wave. You're going to kill yourself. But at least in this one, with the waves that I saw, they're all those, like, they're very manageable. So how are you kind of how are you teaching them how to paddle and how to enter into the wave, and then, you know, how to, like, read the wave so that they know when it's time to stand up and all that? Are you doing that? Are you kind of coaching? Are you coaching as well?
Yeah. So again, right now we're just testing, but when we're going to be open, we're going to have a whole arm of our club and our park is going to be geared towards beginners, or maybe like wounded warriors or people that will benefit from, like you say, a controlled environment to learn how to surf. Now, we have a wave that we can dial up out the back that is a barreling beast of a slab that really good surfers can have a hard time surfing.
Really?
But yeah. Go to YouTube and you can look up our Palm Springs Surf Club. You're going to see some amazing waves with really good pro guys that are just ripping it and getting barreled and doing aerials, all in a swimming pool. It's amazing what can happen in this pool. But we can also change the wave that we are even testing right now, which is kind of foreshadowing the future wave that we're going to have of a beginner wave. And that's the kind of beginner wave that we took out these high school kids who really don't surf so much, or these kids from Watts. And we call it Baby Queens after the Queens on Waikiki in Hawaii, where it's a soft, rolling little whitewater wave. And almost anyone can approach it and get into it. And the way we teach them is by example. We're with them. We're literally in the water with them. We never let anyone out of our arm's reach. Sometimes the smaller kids will ride on the front of a longer board while someone is riding on the back, or we push them into the whitewater, someone else catches them. We have very experienced veteran surf guys, been around the world between our friends, our group, and we've got two pro guys, Shane Magnuson and Kalani Robb, who surf anything the world wants to throw at them. And between our group, we just take care of these people. We want them to have a good experience, to have the joy of riding water. You don't have to worry about like the shark or the riptide or the outside set or some other thing. But you take that muscle memory and that joy to the ocean if you want to. But in the meantime, they can isolate the learning experience or the joy of riding the wave in a controlled environment. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
I've seen people's lives change just in our little pool. In this little pool right here, when we build our bigger pool with the outer wave and the inner wave on the inside, it's going to be an amazing thing. It's going to be an amazing thing. But I tell you, all these hardened, grizzled surf guys who've been around the world and they come surf this wave, you know what? At the end of the day, a smile is a smile. And these guys are full-on pro guys. You know, we've had world champ Italo Ferreira. We've had Felipe Toledo, James Bryan, Rob Machado, Shane Dorian. I mean, the list goes on. Ben Gravy. So many talented surf guys come out and have such a wonderful time here. You know, it's not the ocean, but it doesn't have to be. Water is water. And that's, from my book, from my life to like now, I think if I had one sense, that's what I would say, you know. Water is water. And if you can live in a desert or mountains, everyone needs water. And so why not enjoy it? Because you know what? There's mountains, there's lakes, there's rivers, any form of water. There's swimming pools. You know, we're a species that needs water. And if we appreciate water, we appreciate life, that's our only chance. No water, no ocean, no hope. Kind of how I end my book. So I think with those very words.
I'm right there with you. So kind of on another technical level, when it comes to the way that you're creating your wave, how big of a wave, if you decided you wanted to have professional surfers come out, you know, and it's going to be Professional Surfer Day, how big of a wave can you make?
Well, that's a function of the size of the pool and the machinery, and we're going to get a bigger pool. We're going to build a bigger pool. We're going to get more machinery. But I think to be conservative and in general terms, I would say that we're going to have a wave on the face that can maybe get up to like maybe 8 feet. You know, I'd say like nice. Head high and maybe like overhead and maybe overhead and a half. You know, it's based on how big you are. But what's almost more important, as you probably know, is the shape of the wave. Is it going to peel?
Yeah.
Is it going to have an air section? Is it going to barrel? You know, and
it has a big long shoulder. I mean, the images that I saw had a very long shoulder to it, and it had a nice barrel to it.
Exactly. I mean, to get a barrel in a swimming pool for someone like who's been surfing, I try to be a purist my whole time. You know, like it's a head scratcher. But you know what? Who would have thought your phone is a camera? You know, or you know, there's so many things in the modern world now.
Yeah. So what kind of bottom do you have?
It's just a crazy, you know, interesting world now, and wave pools are going to be part of it.
Just a technical question. So, what kind of bottom is is this pool? Is it concrete? Is it shaped? Is it deep? And then does it have like a simulated sandbar? What is anything like that?
No. It's going to be a concrete bottom, and right now we're just using the same pool that was in the Wet and Wild, pool. We did change the pump house with our machinery. But our future pool, it will be concrete, but it's going to have a contour bottom. So the wave will come, it'll form like a peak and then peel left and right, basically. So we are going to have a contour bottom. So it's going to be a good high quality wave, natural or man-made. You know, and our whole approach is to not have it be exclusive or like a country club. There's other models that have, you know, high-end homes or a club, and then you get to surf the pool. We want to be open to the public, and we'll have our price points, and you can rent it out for private sessions and stuff, but we want it to be accessible. The city of Palm Springs is hugely supportive of us. The chamber, the businesses, the schools, hotels, the restaurants, boom, everyone down the line. Our property neighbors are the Agua Hedionda Indian tribe. Who knows what kind of land use things we can maybe go into with them. But this wave, the fact that people are riding water, they're surfing, that there is water moving. When water moves, humans move. The economy moves. The spirit moves. There's change. There's just something about moving water. It's like watching a fire. You can't take your eyes off it. And moving water is a magical thing. And it's wave pools are not a crime. And at one point, I almost was thinking, what's the big deal? I've had my own little metamorphosis as well. Over time, seeing how this is going to bring a lot of joy to a lot of people, and not just surf guys who can already surf. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so a smile is a smile. Water is water.
Yeah. How many people can you have out there in the pool at one time?
Oh, I think it's going to be programmed like on a public session, like maybe 12 people an hour. So you actually would program. It's kind of like a golf course where your tee time is at this time, and you're going to be with these people. But then there'll be the opportunity for corporate or private buyouts for parties or companies that want to come in and they want to buy the pool for 4 hours and then they have it, that type of thing. But
is it going to be just? Is there going to be just one wave, or are you going to have like kind of the outside sets as well?
Yeah, well, there'll be, like I said, there's basically going to be one wave out the back, and it'll have a set of maybe between 4 to 8 waves, depending on the actual wave that's going to come out. Maybe up to 10 waves in a set. I think it's going to be more like 6 to 8. But that energy, once it breaks on the outside and rolls to the inside, it will reform, and then it will break again on the inside in a manner that is going to be perfect for beginners or people that want to learn surf or that want to pick up surf. I haven't surfed for 10, 15 years, and actually, when I first bought my surfboard, I went with a friend of mine, and then I got lost into surfing, and he had a far more productive life and developed movies in Canada and stuff like that. And he actually saw my picture in the Chamber of Commerce magazine, and he got in touch with me. And he's excited. He hasn't really surfed in years, and he says, I'm looking forward to this because I want to get back into it. And for anyone who lives between, Santa Monica and San Diego, they can drive 2 hours and come to our park. And that's a pretty wide net of surfers. Plus, the Palm Springs International Airport is literally 3 minutes up the road. So I think we're going to have a good reach of people that can come. Again, our geography here is absolutely amazing. The timing of us getting this property and our technology, those three, that's our trifecta right now for delivering something that really no one else can. Our technology is truly cutting edge. This is a world premiere technology put out by SurfLock and Tom Lechfeld and his group. You can look up SurfLock LOCH online, along with the Palm Springs Surf Club. And what we're going to do here, I think, is really amazing. It feels like a good extension and evolution of what I've done before with my public sector planning experience and my community stuff and consulting and the communities. It's somehow it's all coming together with my partnership group, and we're all excited. We all bring something different to the table. We've got a couple people from different areas, and we've all come together. We're a really strong team, and we're looking to finalize our funding and start construction and open fall next year.
Do you feel like you're in competition with Kelly Slater?
No. In fact, Kelly and Kalani Rob, they're very good friends. Kelly's pool up in Lemoore is an amazing wave, and it really showed the world like what can happen in a wave pool. It's different technology. All technologies have their pluses and minuses. We think there's a lot of pluses on ours. He's a good way up the road in Central California, but he has the private model. It's not public. You can't just. I don't believe you can just go there unless you want to pay. I don't know if it's like $50,000 or $65,000 for an exclusive rental of it. So we kind of have a different business plan of we're more like a golf course. The closest example to us is the BSR wave pool in Waco, Texas. And that has kind of the look and feel more along the lines of what we're doing. And they are open to the public. And they're actually full, like, a lot. They have, like, a waiting list. It takes time to get on their calendar. So when people ask us about the business viability of what we're doing, we point to Waco. You fly into Austin, and you drive 2 hours to Waco, and then, you have your 1 or 2 days of surf that you arrange prior through their internet. Here people are going to either fly directly into this airport and drive 3 minutes down the road, or you'll have a 2-hour drive from, Malibu to San Diego, and you can come to Palm Springs, which is kind of an iconic tourist destination outside of the national parks and the theme parks and the beaches of California, Palm Springs. And, we're trying to pick up where Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Bob Hope, and all those boys left off. We're going to pick it up and take it to a different level with our little surf fantasy and bring in the joy of water,
Funny.
It's so exciting. So when does this open?
I think we're looking to open like the end of summer of next year. Yeah.
So you're still kind of fantastic. Hey,
yeah,
so we have just a few more minutes.
Okay.
I was going to say we have a few more minutes left to go in the show. So is there any kind of a last takeaway ideas that you'd like to share? And then also, why don't you go ahead and once you're done with that, why don't you go ahead and give us what your contact information is and the contact information for the Oceanside Surf Museum or the California Surf Museum and the Palm Springs Surf Club.
Okay, sure. Yeah, people have more similarities than differences. And the world needs our help. The world is a magical place, but you got to take care of it. You want to save the world, well, then you got to save the oceans. And it doesn't matter where you live. And you want to save the oceans, you may as well start with one patch of water at a time. And that's what I learned, and that's what we're able to do, in Carlsbad. It's hard to stay healthy and happy at the same time, but it's possible. You got to work at it. And like with my book, I'm kind of more the creative guy. I would love for my book to get out into like oceanographic museums or aquariums or be a graduate level environmental policy reading thing, but I kind of don't know how to do that. I'm not good at marketing myself. If someone wants to help me with that or give me an idea or a lead, I would love to talk to someone about that part of it. I would like my book to be in the hands of like students who are trying to study the environment and want to change the world, and they need a good inspirational true story, not a theoretical story, a true story of what can happen from someone who had no idea that I would be involved in this. And if you want to do something really important, you got to find something that's bigger than yourself and your wallet and your pocketbook and who you touch. How can you touch a greater part of the world? So that would be my message. The Surf Museum is surfmuseum.org. You can look up Palm Springs Surf Club online, and I believe we have an email address on there. And my personal email address would be Eric, ERIC, at PacificOceanArt, ART, straightacross.com, PacificOceanArt.com. And I also have another one for the surf club, E.Munoz at PalmSpringsSurfClub.com. So either of those two.
So are you I'm sorry, go ahead. Say that again?
No, that's it. Yeah, E.Munoz at PalmSpringsSurfClub.com or Eric at Pacific Ocean Art. And, if there's any comments, I really love, hearing from people and taking input, comical, give me a hard time, ideas, anything. I accept it all, and I look forward to it. So human interaction and comedy and people getting along with each other, being inspired by nature, I mean, that's what makes the world go round. And I think that's a big part of what you try and cover in your program. And I'm really honored that you invited me to talk so long about myself. It was a little weird talking about myself, but my book, my story, my things, and what's in my head, and I'm really honored, and I really do appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. So it looks like that's going to conclude our show. And so, Eric, I just really want to thank you for coming on. I think you were terrific, and you had so much insight about invasive species and the Surf Club and the Surf Museum and your book. And so I think you were a fantastic guest. So thank you very much for coming on. Also, I want to thank all of my listeners. I hope you enjoyed the show. I really appreciate your involvement and your willingness to listen to my guest and to me. So I'm going to ask you if you would please follow, subscribe, or like us on Blog Talk Radio, YouTube, or my Facebook page, which is David Collis, Nightlife with David Collis. So I appreciate all that. I want to, without further ado, I want to say, let's journey together. Good night, and have a great tomorrow.